So you might have noticed that the way I was discussing the distinction between circumspection and knowing or mere observing, um, I distinguished them as two different ways of being conscious. Now, Heidegger doesn't use the word consciousness except to criticize it, or to distinguish Dasein from consciousness. I don't think you need to do that, or he needs to do that. The reason Heidegger doesn't use the word consciousness is because he thinks consciousness has implicitly within it the assumption that the fundamental mode of being in the world is knowing or awareness, or rather, or mere observing. And that the kind of pragmatic awareness that we have when we're driving down the street, doing dishes, mowing the lawn, and all that. Well, actually, our basic everyday mode of being in the world is because it's pragmatic and because it's not theoretical. He thinks that if you start talking about consciousness, you're going to pass over that. And and you see, and you see that in his lectures on Husserl, where he criticizes Husserl's conception of consciousness because he thinks Husserl thinks of consciousness as in essentially epistemic terms, that is, in terms of theory of knowledge. I'm not sure whether he's right about that or not is a separate issue. So we have Dasein, and we have circumspection, and we have knowing, or mere observing. Now, one more point, or part of the section on the worldhood of the world that I want to discuss is the section on signs and significations. And that's just because in the relationship or in the character of the being of a sign, which is a special kind of relation, special kind of reference, what Heidegger called indicating. The character of the ready to hand and the worldhood of the world. Remember, Dasein essentially is being in the world. To understand Dasein, we must understand the world, but we want to understand the world ontologically. We want to understand the fundamental character of the world, phenomenologically, the worldhood of the world. And again, you're driving down the street, car in front of you puts on its turn signal, and then your thought is immediately directed towards the future event of the car moving to the left lane. And you really can't really understand signification, indication, without understanding that that signs are essentially related to, well, in this case, an event in the future, right? And it's that in order to, right? So let's say I'm using the turn signal. I use the turn signal, and I do that in order to show that I'm moving to the left lane. I'm moving to the left lane in order to avoid the truck in front of me that's going very slowly. And that's all present in the context of our circumspection awareness of the world, not as mere objects, right? You know, you get in a lot of trouble if you just start staring at the truck in front of you and try to describe its intrinsic qualities rather than seeing the brake light that's on. And again, staring at the light's not going to tell you what their nature is. The nature of the light is as an indicator. And your consciousness of that, I'll just use that term, is a kind of consciousness which is essentially for something else, right? To really grasp the sign is not to stare at it in isolation, it's to use it. And when we use the sign, we're aware of the special relationship between the being of the sign, let's say it's a stop sign, and something else, my putting my foot on the brake and stopping. Okay. So Heidegger then moves on after criticizing the view of the world as just a collection of present at hand entities, and developing this claim that fundamentally, primordially, in the first instance, really all the time in our lives, being of the entities we encounter is ready to hand, except in a special, when we take up a special theoretical attitude, a theoretical attitude which is not part of daily life, or when it is a part of daily life, it's part of daily life also in the context of the ready to hand. If I'm using a microscope to investigate the character of this bacterium, the microscope, I'm taking a theoretical attitude trying to describe this particular bacterium, but even here, I'm using the microscope. And the microscope is not revealed as something that's just there with intrinsic qualities. It's a piece of equipment. It's ready to hand. Ready to hand, in this case, ready to be used to look at the bacterium or discover its nature. So, what was Descartes' view of the being of the world and the being of Dasein, being of you and me? Descartes famously known as a defender of dualism, the view that the human person is really a combination of a physical body, which is like a really elaborate biological machine, and an immaterial soul. And that the universe, the world, can be understood, can be described as consisting of two kinds of entities. The one being physical objects, which are characterized by being extended by their spatial properties, and minds, which are characterized by their mental properties, by thought. Now, Heidegger's difficulty with Descartes, or his critique of Descartes, is not the critique that you often come by when philosophers of mind say, oh, there can't be some non-physical substance or whatever, because we know, or we have good reason to think, the world is entirely material. Those materialist philosophers who want to understand the human being as an extended thing are falling into the same mistake, except for them. The present-at-hand entities that constitute the world are just physical things, whereas for Descartes, the present-at-hand entities that constitute the world are both physical things characterized by extension, their spatial properties, and minds characterized by thought, by mental properties. Now, I think it helps to think about this view that Descartes has and think about what kind of relationship we are led to think we have to the world, Dasein has to the world, if we think of ourselves as being an immaterial mind with the character of thought, and we think of the world outside of us as being things with the character of extension. Well, if that's your view, then the world is utterly disconnected from you, from Dasein, from the being that you have is in isolation from the being of things in the physical world. And then the history of philosophy since Descartes has been the attempt to try to connect the two, perhaps by doing it causally, right? So you might say, well, I have in my mind a certain perceptual experience of a pen, and that perceptual experience is caused by the real pen, which is out there and characterized by its properties, its physical properties, just like my mental experience is characterized, this mental event is characterized by mental properties. That's the opposite of the view that Heidegger thinks we should have. Because if I am essentially in the world, not as to present, not the way one present at hand entity is connected, related to another one, which is the way mind and physical objects are connected in Descartes' ontology, then it's already the case that I'm in the world. It's already the case that there is a pen. There's not the problem of knowing, of getting outside of this box, of thinking of the mind as a container. So like on Descartes' view, the mind is a container that contains these mental properties. And the world consists of these physical objects, which are characterized merely by spatial qualities, geometrical qualities. And then it's impossible, it seems, to come to a recognition of the way our involvement with the world is essential to our nature. And we get sort of wrapped up with this idea, oh, how do I know that anything exists outside of my mind, and all of that. We go to that, we do the epistemic thing, and miss out on the ontological fact about our being as Dasein, which is our being in the world in a manner quite different from the being that a mind has with other physical objects. So here's an example that Heidegger gives. Think about the relationship you have to something when you touch it. So that's a way of being in the world. So you grab hold of something, let's say. You feel its resistance. You feel its hardness. That's a way Dasein can be in the world. But that's not the way two present at hand entities can relate to each other. There might be a pen against a phone, right? But the pen doesn't touch the phone. They could be closely related spatially. They're not very distant from each other. But when I am holding something in my hand, I'm touching, I'm experiencing the resistance of the object, and the resistance of the object is not in any way explained by the fact that my fingers are, only a half a millimeter away from the glass of this container, are much closer at all. The closeness that one has to an object when one holds it cannot be understood in terms of the relationship two present hand objects have to each other. Okay, thanks for listening, and we'll move on with the next video when I get around to it. Thanks.